Tonight we slip quietly into the heart of ancient Egypt, where the golden light of the setting sun spills across the slow-moving Nile, and reeds sway with the kind of hypnotic rhythm that makes your eyelids heavy. You're walking through the dusty streets of Thebes, past mud-brick homes painted in fading whites and reds, and you can hear donkeys braying as their hooves clatter on stone. The air smells faintly of bread just pulled from communal clay ovens, but it also carries that dry mineral scent of desert sand, and if you take a deep breath, well, there's just the tiniest whiff of people who haven't brushed their teeth yet today. Which, to be fair, might include you, because in this world, toothpaste is only just being invented. You probably won't survive this without at least one serious cavity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the light, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the riverbank, where fishermen mend their nets and children splash in the shallows. The Nile is life here, food, water, and transport, and as you lean against a palm trunk, you notice a boy chewing on a slender twig. He rubs it back and forth over his teeth, not playfully, but deliberately, almost as if it's his version of a toothbrush. That's when it hits you. Even in this time of pyramids and pharaohs, people worry about dirty mouths. And considering how sandy the bread is, every bite basically a mouthful of ground-up quartz, it makes sense. Your sandals crunch over gravel as you stroll deeper into the market. Women carry jars of natron, the white mineral powder they use for everything from mummification to laundry soap. Some sprinkle it into jars labeled for personal care. You pick up a clay cup of the stuff, sniff it, and sneeze. It's salty and sharp. A vendor laughs at you, gesturing that yes, people do rub this into their gums, because cleanliness is next to godliness, or at least, next to keeping your teeth from falling out too soon. Historians still argue whether natron's popularity in oral care was actually effective, or if it just made people feel like they were squeaky clean for 5 minutes before their gums started burning. Night deepens, and oil lamps flicker in doorways. You hear chanting from a nearby temple, and the sight is mesmerizing. Priests in white linen carrying bowls of ground herbs and powders, smoke rising in slow curls as offerings burn. You wander closer and catch a whiff of myrrh, sweet, resinous, and oddly comforting. This same scent, you realize, often found its way into mixtures rubbed on teeth. Myrrh was antiseptic, though they wouldn't have used that word, they just knew it soothed the gums. Imagine discovering that by accident, maybe after chewing a sticky resin ball while praying and suddenly realizing your mouth didn't hurt anymore. A stray cat slinks across your path. Egyptians adore cats, and this one looks smug, like it knows secrets you don't. You follow it around a corner, only to find yourself face to face with a group of older men gnawing on bread. You watch as they pause mid-bite, rub at sore gums, and reach for jars of strange powders to dab on their teeth. The process seems ordinary to them, yet you know you're witnessing the earliest stages of something that will one day sit on every bathroom sink in the world. And here's a quirky tidbit. While you might imagine these people brushing with neat little wooden tools, most of the time it was just fingers and powder. Picture trying to scrub your molars with your index finger dipped in chalky dust. Primitive, sure, but maybe not that different from someone swishing baking soda in the 1800s. The cat, now perched on a ledge, looks down at you with what can only be described as judgment. Maybe it's thinking, at least I just lick my fur. You humans are out here inventing mouth sand. A warm breeze stirs, carrying the sound of distant drums. Somewhere beyond, feasts are beginning, platters of roasted goose, figs, beer brewed thick and sweet. You can't help but think of what that would do to your breath. Garlic, onions, fish, yeah, not great. The need for fresh breath isn't new, and it's no wonder these powders gained popularity. In fact, ancient love poems sometimes praised not just eyes and hair, but sweet-smelling mouth. Imagine someone writing you a Valentine's card today with that line, "It's flattering, sure, but it also implies you might need to double-check your oral routine." As you walk, you start to see how everything ties together. Religion, food, medicine, they all overlap. Priests mix powders for rituals, but people borrow the recipes for daily use. Merchants sell spices for cooking, but those same spices end up in little jars for teeth. Life is interconnected, practical, and sometimes just plain experimental. And while it's easy for you to laugh at the thought of scrubbing with ox hoof powder, you also realize you don't know what works yet. Maybe they're onto something. The night sky blooms with stars, brighter than any modern city would allow. You tilt your head back, take it in, and feel the hum of life around you. Somewhere in this bustling, fragrant, dusty city, someone is right now grinding up pumice stone and mixing it with dried herbs, unknowingly crafting the earliest ancestor of your bedtime toothpaste. And as you stretch your jaw, maybe unconsciously run your tongue over your own teeth, you're reminded that this very human concern, keeping your mouth clean, connects you directly to people who lived thousands of years ago. The lamps flicker lower, the sounds fade, and the city seems to sink into a kind of hush. You tuck this little piece of history into your mind. You, standing here, watching the origins of something so ordinary, so personal, begin to take shape in the shadows of pyramids and temples. That morning, you wander the streets of Thebes again, and the first thing that strikes you is the smell of bread wafting from the communal ovens. Everyone here eats bread every single day, so much that it's practically the foundation of life. And yet, when you reach for a hunk offered by a friendly baker, you realize something modern teeth would absolutely hate. The bread is gritty, almost sandy, and when you bite down, your molars protest with a faint crunch. It's not sugar rotting teeth here, it's the flour itself, ground between rough stone mills that shed tiny fragments of quartz and grit. Every loaf is basically a low-level dental demolition crew. You chew slowly, trying not to wince. And while the taste is earthy and filling, the texture is brutal. You lick your teeth and find they already feel rough, coated with microscopic scratches. It makes you think, no wonder Egyptians were so obsessed with dental remedies. Archaeologists today have opened mummies and discovered mouths riddled with worn enamel, abscesses, and cavities. Historians still argue whether Egyptians fully understood the cause, that it was their beloved bread doing most of the damage, or if they blamed evil spirits gnawing from the inside. Either way, it left them scrambling for solutions. You keep walking, and the market is alive with chatter. A woman balances a basket on her head while arguing over the price of barley. Children chase each other, laughing, until one boy stops mid-game, clutching his jaw. His friend teases him, but an older woman comes over, rubbing his gums gently with a powder pulled from a pouch at her waist. She sprinkles some on his tongue, pats his head, and shoos him back to play. You're left staring, realizing how commonplace these little dental rituals already are. The sun climbs, and sweat beads on your neck. A merchant beckons you over to his stall, piled high with herbs, salts, and dried flowers. He grins, showing teeth worn flat like tiny paving stones. He explains, in words you half guess from gestures, that these herbs aren't just for food. They're for chewing, mixing, scrubbing. You reach for a bundle of dried mint leaves, crumble one between your fingers, and inhale. The scent is sharp, almost familiar, like the cooling bite of modern toothpaste. For a second, you forget you're centuries away from Colgate, until you remember you're holding nothing but a brittle leaf in your palm. Here's the quirky part. Egyptians didn't stop at mint or natron. Some recipes included ground donkey hooves or burned eggshells. Not exactly what you'd call appetizing. Imagine walking into a pharmacy today and asking, "Hi, yes, could I get the tube with extra hoof, please?" You'd probably be escorted out politely. But back then, the logic made sense. Hard materials ground to powder could scour teeth, almost like sandpaper. Painful, maybe, but effective in its own harsh way. You sit in the shade of a mud brick wall and watch life swirl around you. Men carry sacks of grain, women braid each other's hair. A passing priest raises his hands toward the temple, muttering incantations, and you realize here, medicine, magic, and daily routine blur into one. If your tooth hurt, you might chew mint, rub in natron, and also recite a protective spell against the worm thought to live in aching gums. Was it placebo? Maybe. But when your molar felt like it was exploding, you'd try anything. The heat intensifies, and you feel parched. Someone offers you a clay cup of beer, thick, sweet, grainy. You gulp, but afterward, your teeth feel coated, sticky. It makes you appreciate modern mouthwash, though you know it won't exist for thousands of years. Instead, you picture reaching for a pinch of powder, rubbing it over your teeth with a finger, spitting into the sand. A crude, messy ritual, but one that might give you a fleeting sense of relief. As the day stretches, you see more evidence everywhere. A nobleman strides past, his attendants fanning him, and his smile, while proud, reveals teeth equally battered by sand and grit. Even the wealthy can't escape the daily grind of their bread. You think back to that first crunchy bite and realize, these people weren't just inventing toothpaste for vanity. It was survival. Their staple food was wearing down their very bones. A little girl approaches you shyly, holding out what looks like a chewed twig. She demonstrates by biting the end until it frays, then rubbing it against her teeth. Her giggle makes it look like a game, but you know you're looking at the ancient version of a toothbrush. Not neat plastic bristles, but fibers of wood scraping off food residue. You take it, try it, and almost choke on the bitter taste. She laughs, claps, and runs off, leaving you with a mouth that tastes like you just licked the bottom of a spice jar. But strangely enough, it does feel cleaner. By sunset, your teeth ache from the day's experiments. You wander back to the river, watching boats glide by, sails catching the last of the light. You think of all the mouths chewing, grinding, suffering through the same problem. It's not glamour or luxury that drives invention here, it's pain. And while you rub your jaw, imagining the inevitable cavity, you begin to see why Egyptians put so much energy into powders, herbs, and strange concoctions. Because with bread like this, every single bite was a slow reminder, your teeth needed all the help they could get. The night is still warm as you slip quietly toward the looming temple, its massive columns lit with flickering lamps that paint the sandstone in gold and shadow. The air here feels heavier, filled with incense that clings to your nostrils. You step inside, and the sound of chanting bounces off the high walls, echoing like waves. At the far end, priests dressed in crisp linen robes are hunched over stone tables, their movements deliberate, grinding herbs with pestles, sprinkling powders into bowls, and muttering prayers with every motion. It looks less like science and more like a magic show, but what they're really doing is crafting the early recipes for oral care. You drift closer, watching one priest crush dried peppermint leaves until they release a sharp, cooling aroma. Another mixes natron with powdered alabaster, the blend chalky and bright under lamplight. You reach out, pinch some between your fingers, and the grains feel harsh, almost sharp, exactly the kind of texture that could scour plaque, though also the kind that might shred your gums if you weren't careful. Historians still argue whether the priests truly believed these blends healed the body, or if their value was mostly symbolic, tiny sacred powders promising purity of both spirit and smile. Your sandals scrape lightly against the temple floor, and no one stops you. You watch them add myrrh resin, which softens as it heats, giving off that sweet, earthy smell you caught earlier near the market. Myrrh has antibacterial qualities modern medicine still respects, though these men describe it in the language of the gods, a balm that keeps evil from lodging in the mouth. A priest dips his finger, rubs the mix onto his teeth, and murmurs a prayer, half hygiene, half spell. And here's a quirky tidbit. These temple recipes weren't written down for everyone. They were considered special knowledge, guarded closely, only whispered among certain circles. Imagine if modern dentists had a secret club where they invented toothpaste behind closed doors, and everyone else had to guess the recipe by sneaking peeks through a window. That's essentially what's happening here. You're the kid peering in while the adults mix potions. The smells swirl around you: sharp natron, cooling mint, earthy myrrh, and the faint sulfuric tang of burnt bone. It's overwhelming, but also strangely comforting. You find yourself swaying a little, lulled by the rhythm of grinding stone on stone. The priests don't measure with spoons or scales, they eyeball it, toss in handfuls, adjust by instinct. It's as much performance as it is preparation, and you realize this is how oral care gets wrapped into ritual. Clean teeth aren't just practical, they are holy. A clean mouth honors the gods. One priest catches your eye and beckons you forward. He presses a small clay jar into your hand, motions for you to try. You hesitate, then dip your finger, rub the gritty paste across your teeth. It's intense. The salt stings, the herbs burn a little, and the abrasive grit scrapes like sandpaper. You cough, sputter, spit into a corner, and everyone around you chuckles softly. Clearly, this is not meant for beginners. And yet, once the sting fades, your mouth does feel oddly fresh, as if someone scrubbed the desert off your molars. As the ritual ends, you follow the priests out into the courtyard. The moon hangs full above, bathing the temple in silver light. A scribe sits nearby with a long strip of papyrus, carefully writing symbols as one priest dictates. You sneak a glance. He's noting down a recipe that includes natron, salt, mint, and dried iris flower. The iris, you'll later learn, is antibacterial, but also highly irritating. People using it probably felt like their gums were on fire. Historians still argue whether this ingredient was genius or just torture disguised as medicine. A gust of night air cools your skin as you lean against a pillar. The city sleeps beyond the walls, but here, knowledge stirs, knowledge that will ripple outward for centuries. Tonight, you've seen that toothpaste didn't start in a shiny bathroom but in the dim glow of temples, where priests, half scientists and half magicians, ground the first powders by hand. And as you rub your tongue over your stinging teeth, you realize that some of these blends, strange as they seem, will survive long enough to inspire the paste on your toothbrush thousands of years later. You smile faintly at the thought, though you don't dare bite into bread again just yet. The dawn breaks pale and pink over Thebes, and you find yourself wandering back into the heart of the marketplace, where the smells of bread, fish, and spices mix into a haze that clings to the air. You're still thinking about the sting of temple powders on your gums when a stall catches your eye. Clay bowls sit in neat rows, each filled with different shades of powder: chalk white, sandy beige, dull grey. The merchant sees your interest and beckons, scooping a pinch of the white stuff into his palm and motioning for you to taste. Against your better judgment, you dab some onto your finger and rub it across your teeth. Instantly, your tongue recoils. It's gritty, almost sharp, like chewing crushed seashells. You've just met the earliest tooth powder. Unlike the herbal blends in the temple, this one is practical, everyday stuff. It's made of pumice, ground into dust, mixed with ashes and maybe even powdered ox hooves. Yes, ox hooves. Not exactly the peppermint fresh image you were hoping for. You can't help but chuckle at the thought of brushing with the same ingredients someone might throw into a fire pit after dinner. Yet, for the Egyptians, the logic was sound: hard materials scoured away debris. The cost? Your enamel probably waved the white flag within a few years. The merchant gestures to his smile, teeth flat and worn, gums darkened by years of powder use. And yet, he beams proudly, as though his mouth is proof of the product's power. You think of how advertising works today: someone in a crisp white coat promising sparkling results. Here, it's just a man with sand-blasted molars insisting, "See? It works. Historians still argue whether these powders genuinely kept mouths cleaner or if they merely sped up the grinding damage already caused by gritty bread. Nearby, a child copies the ritual, dipping a finger into a bowl, smearing it across tiny teeth, spitting into the dust. His laughter rings out as if it's a game. You crouch, ask to try again, and this time he hands you a twig with a frayed end, softened from chewing. You dip it into the powder, scrape it against your teeth, and the combination of abrasive grit and fibrous wood feels startlingly effective. Primitive, yes, but not all that different from your toothbrush bristles dipped in toothpaste. For a brief moment, you wonder if this boy would look at your modern bathroom shelf and shrug, same thing, fancier jar. You linger, watching the powders change hands. Some women tuck them into small linen pouches tied at their belts, ready for use throughout the day. Others scoop larger amounts into jars for the household, like stocking up on soap. The powders themselves vary, some with stronger herbal scents, others purely mineral. One particularly odd batch carries a faint smell of burned leather. The merchant proudly explains it's made with charred ox hooves. You manage not to gag, but the thought of brushing with barbecued hoof dust makes you mutter, "Yeah, I'll stick with mint, thanks." But there's a fascinating detail. These powders aren't always just functional. Some people add crushed malachite or other colorful minerals, not for cleaning, but for aesthetic appeal. Imagine brushing with a sparkling green paste, just to feel fancy. It's the earliest hint that oral care wasn't only about health, it was about status. If your breath smelled like herbs and your teeth sparkled faintly green under the lamplight, you were showing off in your own way. As the sun climbs higher, you wander away, reflecting on what you've learned. You've seen that oral care here doesn't split neatly into medicine and cosmetics. Instead, it's a blend: abrasive powders to scour, herbs to scent, rituals to sanctify. People chew, rub, spit, and repeat, all in pursuit of a mouth that feels less gritty, less foul, more divine. You remember that priest with his jar of iris and natron and realize the everyday folks and the holy men weren't so far apart. One ground powder by instinct, the other by ritual, but both were chasing the same goal: relief. The breeze shifts, and you hear distant laughter near the river. A group of young men joke as they pass, one slapping the other on the back, making fun of his bad breath. The embarrassed friend quickly pulls out a pouch, dips a finger, and scrubs his teeth before joining in the laughter again. And just like that, you recognize another timeless truth. People then, like now, cared not only about pain or health, but about how they smelled, how they looked, how they were perceived. Even the oldest tooth powder was as much about confidence as cleanliness. You smile at the scene, the grit still lingering on your tongue, and think this might not be your idea of minty fresh, but to the Egyptians, it was the beginning of something monumental, the first true step toward toothpaste. The day slips into golden afternoon, and as you wander along the narrow streets, the heat softens, replaced by a cool breeze off the Nile. The market is still bustling, but your attention drifts to a shaded corner where bundles of herbs hang upside down, their scents filling the air like a natural perfume. You can't help but pause: the sharp, fresh bite of mint, the resinous sweetness of myrrh, and the briny tang of rock salt all mingle, creating a smell that's strangely familiar. For the first time, it feels like you're sniffing the ancestor of modern toothpaste. A woman in a linen dress notices your curiosity and gestures you closer. She crushes a dried mint leaf between her fingers and waves the fragments under your nose. The aroma is cool and lively, instantly waking your senses. She then scoops a pinch of powdered myrrh, adds a few grains of rock salt, and mixes them in a small bowl. With a practiced motion, she dips her finger, rubs it along her teeth, and exhales with a smile as if refreshed. You're watching a recipe unfold, simple, aromatic, and effective in ways modern science would later confirm. The mint freshens breath, the myrrh kills bacteria, and the salt adds bite, scouring gently and tightening the gums. It's like watching the prototype of the minty blue paste you squeeze from a tube. Of course, there's no fluoride yet, but for a people living with gritty bread and constant dental wear, this blend was revolutionary. Historians still argue whether salt was included for practical effect or symbolic purity, but either way, it became a common addition. You roll some between your fingers and can't resist trying. The salt stings your gums, but the mint rush afterward is almost invigorating. You grimace, then laugh. It's terrible and terrific at the same time. And here's the quirky twist: not everyone agreed on the perfect recipe. Some preferred a more spicy mix, adding peppercorn or cinnamon-like bark for heat. Others leaned heavily on resins like frankincense, turning their paste into something between a breath freshener and a mouth perfume. Imagine brushing your teeth and then realizing your breath smells like a Christmas candle. Not necessarily bad, just festive. A donkey brays loudly nearby, breaking your train of thought, and you glance over to see a vendor scooping powders into tiny alabaster jars, each sealed with clay stoppers. These aren't cheap, clearly meant for wealthier families who could afford imported herbs like cinnamon or exotic spices brought up the Nile. You realize oral care here already carries a divide: simple powders of natron for commoners, elaborate blends of mint and resin for elites. Status, once again, is tied to your smile. You sit on a low stone wall, watching people haggle and trade. A young man hands a small jar of minty powder to his beloved, who laughs and playfully dabs some on his teeth. Their flirtation is light-hearted, but also practical. Bad breath was as much a deal-breaker then as now. You chuckle softly, thinking how little some things have changed. If you were to time travel back here and open a dating profile, fresh breath required would still be non-negotiable. The sun lowers, and shadows stretch across the city. You wander toward a courtyard where workers are grinding herbs, the rhythmic sound of stone against stone creating a steady beat. You notice they use not only mortar and pestle but also flat grinding stones, smearing the mix into paste before drying it into powders again. The process is messy, dust floating in the air, catching in your throat until you cough. The workers laugh at your reaction, as though they've seen plenty of outsiders choke on their spice cloud. One man presses a pinch of powder into your palm. It smells sharp and medicinal, dominated by salt and iris root. You hesitate, then try it, rubbing it along your teeth. The iris root is bitter, almost numbing, and you can feel a faint tingle spread along your gums. Modern scientists would later confirm iris has antibacterial qualities, but in larger doses, it's toxic. You wonder whether people here brushed cautiously or simply endured the burn. Maybe they figured, if it hurts, it must be working. As twilight deepens, you feel a growing appreciation for the ingenuity at play. These people didn't just randomly throw powders together, they experimented, tested, refined, all by trial and error. Somewhere between the grit of natron, the sweetness of myrrh, and the sting of salt, they stumbled onto the world's first breath-freshening, germ-fighting concoctions. And you, standing here with a mouth that tastes like a salty herb garden, realize you've just witnessed the ancient moment where toothpaste started to feel pleasant. The market winds down, torches flicker, and laughter drifts into the night air. You press your tongue to your teeth, marveling at the strange, tingly freshness that lingers. For all its oddities, you have to admit, mint, myrrh, and a dash of mystery worked surprisingly well. The night has settled over Thebes, but inside a quiet scribe's chamber the air is alive with the crackle of oil lamps and the whisper of papyrus being unrolled. You step softly across the reed mats, and before you lies a scroll older than the city itself, the famous Ebers papyrus, stretching almost 20 meters long if fully opened, packed with columns of black and red ink. The scribe dips his reed pen, carefully copying lines that speak not just of gods and charms but of recipes for healing, including some that reach directly into the mouth. You kneel closer, tracing the neat rows of hieroglyphs with your eyes. The scribe pauses, murmurs a passage aloud, and you catch words describing rinses made from honey, beer, and herbs, mixtures to soothe gums or clean the tongue. Some lines hint at powders applied to the teeth, though the language is so poetic it's hard to tell whether you're reading medicine or prayer. Historians still argue whether these papyrus texts were practical instruction manuals or symbolic guides blending magic and treatment. But either way, you're staring at one of the oldest written records of what could be called toothpaste. The scribe notices your interest and grins, pointing at a recipe that includes natron, salt, and iris flower. He pinches his own jaw to mime a toothache, then pretends to chew, showing how the mixture was used. You can't help but laugh softly, marveling at how even sacred texts include advice on something as everyday as bad breath. It's like stumbling on a medieval Bible with a footnote. Also, floss. The papyrus itself is fragile, its fibers dry and brittle, the ink fading at the edges. Yet, it holds an incredible range of human experience: cures for burns, poultices for broken bones, and right alongside them, instructions for oral care. You realize this scroll is less about lofty science and more about practical survival. The people who wrote it lived in the same dusty streets you walk today, chewed the same gritty bread, and fought the same aching gums. Their solutions, however strange, were desperately real. A quirky detail catches your eye. One section describes using beer as a mouth rinse, mixed with herbs and spices. Beer here isn't the bubbly lager you'd find at a modern pub, it's thick, cloudy, almost like liquid bread. Yet somehow, someone thought gargling with it might cleanse the mouth. You imagine a dentist today saying, twice a day, swish with craft IPA. It's either genius or the best excuse ever. The scribe continues reading aloud, his voice steady, almost hypnotic. He speaks of worms that burrow into teeth, causing pain, a belief shared by many ancient cultures. You picture tiny invisible creatures gnawing through enamel, a terrifying thought, yet one that made sense when you had no microscope to prove otherwise. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly believed in literal worms or if the word was metaphorical, a way of describing the deep, writhing pain of decay. Either way, these recipes were the defense: powders, rinses, prayers. You lean back, letting the flicker of lamplight wash over the scroll. It strikes you that this moment, words recorded, copied, preserved, is why you know anything at all about Egyptian dental care. Without scribes painstakingly writing down every remedy they heard, the knowledge would have vanished into the sand. Instead, their recipes drifted across centuries, resurfacing in Greek and Roman texts, and eventually echoing in your own toothpaste tube. The scribe dips his pen again, careful not to blot the papyrus. You notice his teeth when he smiles, flat, worn, but surprisingly intact. Perhaps he's a believer in the very formulas he copies. Or perhaps he just got lucky, born with teeth that endured the grind. Either way, the irony isn't lost on you. The man writing about dental health spends his nights breathing in clouds of lamp smoke and papyrus dust, while his own molars slowly wear away. As the night deepens, you hear the distant sound of drums outside, a reminder that life in Thebes continues, noisy and bright. But here in this quiet chamber, history whispers in ink and fiber. You realize toothpaste didn't just exist in bowls and jars, it was codified, canonized, written into one of humanity's oldest medical handbooks. And though the recipes may sting, burn, or baffle, they are the ancestors of that minty ribbon you squeeze every night before bed. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the countless hands that touched this scroll over millennia, each one tracing the same lines, perhaps trying the same recipes, tasting the same sting of natron and iris root. And you feel a strange kinship, as though across thousands of years, someone is still reminding you, don't forget to brush. The Nile breeze is warm again as you stroll past the edge of the market and into a quieter street where strange odors waft from clay jars stacked high. Some smell sharp, like ashes from a fire, others carry the chalky tang of powdered bone. You peer closer and realize you've wandered into the apothecary's quarter, places where healers and merchants prepare remedies for every imaginable ailment. And tonight, you're about to encounter some of the oddest toothpaste ingredients humans have ever tried. A broad-shouldered man in a faded linen tunic gestures you over. He opens one jar to reveal a powder so pale it glows under lamplight. He dips in a spoon and sprinkles a little on his tongue, grimacing as if to say, "Strong, but good for you." He presses the spoon into your hand. Against your better judgment, you taste. The powder is brittle, chalky, with a faint hint of sulfur. You later learn it's burned ox hoof, charred, ground, and stored like medicine. The Egyptians believed it scrubbed teeth clean and maybe even strengthened them. Historians still argue whether this was medicinal or more symbolic, tied to the strength of the animal itself. Either way, you feel like you've just licked the bottom of a barbecue pit. Nearby, another jar holds the blackened remains of eggshells, crushed into fine grit. The apothecary demonstrates, mixing the powder with water until it forms a grayish paste. He rubs it across his teeth, spits, then grins proudly, bits of shell dust still stuck between his gums. It's both horrifying and fascinating, like watching someone brush with sidewalk chalk. You imagine going to a modern dentist and being told, "Good news, we'll just crush some eggshells for you." Not exactly reassuring. And yet, there's a strange logic here. Eggshells are calcium-rich, and ground fine enough, they could theoretically remineralize teeth. Maybe the Egyptians stumbled upon this by accident, maybe by observation. Did they notice animals gnawing shells and think, "Hey, that could work for us"? Or was it just another experiment in the endless trial and error that defined ancient medicine? As you linger, a young boy appears, clutching his jaw in pain. The apothecary pulls a jar of ash from the shelf, mixes it with honey, and smears it on the boy's gums. The boy winces, then slowly relaxes, the sweetness of honey soothing while the ash cleans. You can't help but marvel at the ingenuity, gross as it sounds. There's real effectiveness hidden in these mixtures. Modern studies have even suggested honey has antibacterial properties, though you doubt anyone here would explain it in terms of microbes. For them, honey was simply a divine gift, healing and protective. Quirky detail? Some recipes even included crushed donkey hooves or powdered oxen teeth. The belief was that cured like, animal strength transferred to human weakness. Imagine brushing with ground molar dust. The thought makes you gag, but for Egyptians, it symbolized resilience. One man nearby shows you a small pouch of what looks like grey sand. With pride, he says it's made from ground donkey hoof. You politely nod, but silently vow never to let that near your molars. The apothecary's workshop hums with activity, grinding stones clacking, jars clinking, pestles pounding. The air is thick with dust, coating your tongue no matter how much you swallow. A cat prowls the shelves, tail flicking, occasionally knocking a jar over. Nobody minds, it seems even cats here have divine permission to meddle with medicine. You imagine one day someone brushing their teeth with a mixture blessed by a cat's paw. And honestly, considering the ingredients, would that even make it worse? You step outside for a breath of fresh air, and the night sounds greet you again, frogs croaking by the river, distant music drifting across the water. But the taste of ash and bone lingers stubbornly in your mouth. You spit into the dirt and shake your head. And yet, as unpleasant as it is, you realize the Egyptians weren't simply being reckless. They were experimenting with every material at hand, pushing the limits of what might soothe, clean, or cure. Some choices make you laugh, others make you cringe, but all of them reveal the sheer determination to fight decay in a world where bread and sand waged war on every tooth. You glance back at the workshop, its lamplight glowing against the darkness. The apothecary is still at work, mixing powders, testing pastes, offering them to neighbors with a smile. And in that moment, you see it, the roots of innovation, born not in luxury but in necessity, carried forward one gritty pinch of eggshell dust at a time. The morning air is cool as you follow the sound of groaning from a small mud brick house. Inside, a man sits hunched, his hand pressed against his swollen jaw, eyes squeezed shut against waves of pain. You've seen the powders, the herbs, the minty rinses, but here is the raw reality: toothache. Not just an inconvenience, but a torment that could wreck someone's life in a world without anesthesia, antibiotics, or your friendly corner dentist. A healer kneels beside him, a bundle of tools laid out on a reed mat. There are bronze picks and little chisels, their edges glinting ominously in the lamplight. You shiver, imagining them pressed into sore gums. The healer, though, begins more gently. He mixes honey with crushed herbs and spreads the paste along the man's gums, chanting softly as if to lull away the pain. The sweetness coats the raw flesh, offering a brief reprieve. Historians still argue whether the chanting was believed to drive out literal toothworms, or if it was more about calming the patient's mind. Either way, the combination of prayer and paste is their version of a dental appointment. The man groans again, louder this time. The healer confers with an assistant, then lifts a small drill-like tool, basically a bow drill, the kind you'd normally use to bore holes in wood. You swallow hard. The healer places it against the tooth, twirls the bow, and the man cries out as the drill grinds into enamel. You can feel your own jaw ache in sympathy. And yet, the healer continues, steady and focused. Incredibly, this isn't fantasy. Archaeologists have found Egyptian skulls with drilled teeth, evidence of such attempts at surgery. Some even show fillings of resin or precious metal hammered into cavities. Primitive, yes, but astonishingly brave. A curious child peers in from the doorway, wide-eyed, and whispers about worms writhing inside teeth. You remember the Ebers papyrus and its references to creatures causing decay. For these people, the idea of invisible bacteria was unthinkable, so worms became the culprit. One debate among modern scholars is whether Egyptians ever physically saw maggots in decayed flesh and assumed the same must be true for teeth. The answer may never be clear. The healer stops drilling, wipes the sweat from his brow, and inspects the damaged tooth. He sprinkles in a powder made of natron and ashes, then covers it with a plug of resin, pressing it down with a bronze pick. The man whimpers, but the bleeding slows, and slowly his breathing evens out. Was it a cure? Maybe temporary. But in that moment, it's a small miracle, relief from agony, however fleeting. A quirky detail catches your attention. Some remedies weren't just physical but theatrical. Certain healers recommended chanting incantations while spitting out the powder, or tying tiny amulets to the jaw to ward off spirits. You imagine sitting in a modern dentist's chair while your doctor waves a charm over your mouth, probably not covered by insurance, but oddly reassuring in a way. You step back into the sunlight, shaken. The sounds of the market feel jarring after the cries inside. People are laughing, trading, chewing bread without thinking twice. And yet, you know that for every cheerful smile, someone else is sitting in pain, waiting for the healer's next attempt at drilling, honey dressing, or whispered prayer. You pause by the river, staring at your reflection in the rippling water. You run your tongue over your teeth, suddenly hyper-aware of every little ache, every spot that could one day erupt into agony. It makes you grateful for fluoride and dentists with numbing gel, even if you dread their drills. Because compared to what you just witnessed, your world is practically paradise. But you also can't help admiring the Egyptians' grit. They didn't just endure, they innovated. With nothing but herbs, honey, and bronze tools, they fought decay tooth and nail. And as brutal as it looked, their efforts planted seeds that would echo in medicine for centuries. You turn away from the water, the image of that man's face still fresh in your mind, And you know one thing for certain. Tonight, when you brush before bed, you'll whisper a little thanks that your toothpaste doesn't come with a side of drilling bow. The palace rises above the city like a mirage of limestone and gold. You slip inside with the crowd of servants carrying trays of figs, bread, and wine, but your attention isn't on the feast, it's on the private chamber beyond, where something far less glamorous is happening. Tonight, you're about to witness dentistry fit for a king. The chamber smells of incense and polished wood, with carved furniture arranged around a reclining couch. On the couch sits the pharaoh himself, or at least one of his nobles, dressed in fine linen and heavy jewelry. He parts his lips, revealing teeth worn flat by years of gritty bread. They aren't sparkling white, but compared to the villages you've seen, his look remarkably well kept. And that's because royal mouths had specialists, dentists whose job was to guard their master's smile. A royal dentist, identified by his embroidered sash, steps forward. He carries a tray of fine linen cloths, alabaster jars, and tiny bronze tools. His assistants grind spices in a mortar, the air filling with warm, fragrant scents. You catch cinnamon, cardamom, maybe even cloves, imports from distant lands brought at staggering expense. Where the villagers used natron and donkey hooves, the pharaoh gets the good stuff. Imagine brushing your teeth with ingredients that today would be sold in a luxury candle store. The dentist dips a linen strip into the aromatic paste, then wraps it around his fingers, carefully polishing each tooth of the pharaoh. The scene feels both intimate and ceremonial. The pharaoh reclines calmly, his attendants fanning him with ostrich feathers while the paste is rubbed gently back and forth. You stifle a laugh at the image, the most powerful man in Egypt, lounging like a cat while someone gives him what's basically a spa-level tooth cleaning. Here's the quirky bit. Records suggest the title chief of dentists actually existed. Some ancient officials proudly carried it, alongside other medical responsibilities. Imagine that on your business card, High Priest of Ra, Guardian of Pharaoh's Teeth. Historians still argue whether these royal dentists performed real treatments or mostly symbolic cleanings, but either way, their role was considered essential. After all, what good is a king's command if it's delivered through rotting teeth and foul breath? The dentist sprinkles crushed pepper and honey into the mix, claiming it strengthens the gums. You shudder at the thought of spicy pepper paste, but the pharaoh doesn't flinch. Maybe he's accustomed to the burn, or maybe power gives you the confidence to pretend nothing hurts. Either way, his smile afterward looks fresher, and the attendants nod approvingly. You step back, watching the ritual unfold. Linen cloths are used like floss, spices like breath mints, honey as a soothing balm. It's a royal blend of medicine and luxury, grounded in the same needs as the common folk but dressed up in exotic imports. You realize oral care, even here, is as much about status as health. A pharaoh's smile wasn't just about eating without pain, it was about projecting divine perfection. The chamber quiets as the session ends. The dentist bows, presenting the pharaoh with a small alabaster jar, likely filled with a personal stash of powdered mint and resin. The pharaoh accepts it, then dismisses his attendants with a wave. You imagine him later, before a feast, dabbing the powder on his teeth for fresh breath, proof that even gods on earth worried about garlic breath. Stepping back into the torchlit corridor, you think about the contrast. In the market, villagers scrape their teeth with twigs and natron. In the temple, priests mix powders that sting and burn. And here, in the palace, the elite enjoy aromatic pastes rubbed with silk-like linen, polished by specialists whose careers depend on royal smiles. Different worlds, same problem: bread, grit, and the eternal fight against decay. As you leave the palace, the stars glitter above, and you picture the pharaoh's radiant grin glowing in the lamplight. For all his wealth and power, his teeth are just as mortal as anyone else's, and behind that polished smile lies the same struggle you've been watching all along. You step out of the palace and back into the bustling streets, the smells of roasting fish and fresh bread mingling with dust and river moisture. It's easy to forget, in the grandeur of gold and incense, that most Egyptians live entirely differently. Their teeth are under siege daily, sand in the bread, gritty flour, and a diet that's simultaneously sweet and abrasive. And now, as you follow a narrow alley lined with small workshops, you realize that innovation isn't limited to palaces. A woman bends over a low table, grinding a mixture with a heavy stone. She hums softly, rhythmically, as she adds ingredients you might not expect. Crushed ox bones, powdered mint, and oddly enough, bits of charcoal from a fire. She explains, without looking up, that the charcoal makes the mouth strong and the teeth white. You blink at the statement, picturing modern toothpaste commercials promising pearly smiles. Did she know she was onto something scientific, or was it superstition mixed with experience? Historians still argue whether the Egyptians understood the antibacterial qualities of charcoal or simply liked its scrubbing effect. Either way, you have to admire the ingenuity. Nearby, children laugh and chase each other, carrying small twigs they use as primitive toothbrushes. You stoop to examine one, noting frayed ends, perfect for scraping plaque from teeth. A mother glances over and nods, proud that her children are learning hygiene through play. Quirky detail: some recipes from this era even suggested mixing powdered myrrh with water and applying it with a twig to freshen breath. Imagine a kid today dabbing tree resin on their molars instead of chewing gum. Somehow, it feels both horrifying and adorable. You wander deeper into the alley and stumble upon a small shrine, candles burning beside a carved image of a god with a lion's head. An elderly man prays, then sprinkles a paste into a small bowl of water, murmuring words you don't understand. He dips a thin brush into the mixture and carefully cleans a client's teeth. You realize that oral care in ancient Egypt isn't just practical, it's spiritual. The teeth aren't only cleaned for health, they are purified, protected against disease, and even connected to divine favor. A debate arises among scholars today. Did this ritualized approach actually improve dental health, or was it symbolic theater that made people feel better? You lean toward a mix of both. Practical scrubbing and abrasive powders surely helped, while the spiritual overlay reinforced daily practice. It's an elegant solution, part science, part belief. As the sun lowers, casting long shadows, you pause to watch a young boy carefully mixing natron with a drop of honey. He whispers something to the paste, smiles, and applies it with a small stick. The ritual is gentle, the outcome uncertain, but the intent is clear. Egyptians, regardless of class, are actively fighting decay with the materials they have. There's creativity, trial and error, and a remarkable sense of persistence. You can almost hear the collective thought echoing across time: if this works even a little, it's worth the effort. With night settling, lanterns flicker along the alley, and the gritty smell of the city mixes with the faint sweetness of honey. You step back, realizing that these small workshops, these little experiments with powders and pastes, are the beating heart of ancient Egyptian dentistry, where everyday people, not kings, laid the groundwork for the innovation that would ripple through history. The Nile glimmers under the rising moon, its surface rippling like liquid silver. You follow the riverbank, drawn to the soft, rhythmic sounds of paddles cutting through water. Fishermen hum, their nets swaying, and in the distance, a temple glows with flickering torchlight. But your focus isn't on fish or gods tonight, it's on the materials that make the first toothpaste possible, harvested straight from the land and river. You kneel by the river, scooping up fine sand and river silt, feeling its gritty texture between your fingers. Egyptians understood that abrasion could remove debris from teeth. It's the same principle in modern toothpaste, though thankfully less crunchy. Some scholars still debate how much people recognized about its cleansing versus symbolic function. Was it medicine, ritual, or both? Either way, you can see the logic. Coarse particles scrub away grime, leaving teeth smoother, if not perfectly polished. A man appears, carrying a basket of herbs. He tips out mint, coriander, and dried iris petals, their scents mixing with the earthy smell of the Nile mud. The fragrance is surprisingly pleasant, and you watch him grind everything with a small stone mortar. He adds natron, a naturally occurring salt, and carefully mixes it into a powder. A quirky detail: some recipes even included burnt eggshells or ground oyster shells to strengthen enamel. You shiver at the thought of chewing sharp oyster shards, but the Egyptians swear by it. Nearby, a woman carries a small jar of honey, the golden liquid catching the moonlight. You watch her add it to the powdered mix, creating a sticky, fragrant paste. Honey wasn't just a sweetener, it had natural antibacterial properties. You almost want to taste it, but common sense, and some lingering memories of gritty charcoal, keeps you from dipping your finger. Historians still argue whether Egyptians understood its medicinal effect or if it was purely culinary luck, but the results speak for themselves: early tooth decay prevention, long before modern science. The woman hands the paste to a child, who carefully spreads it onto a small twig and begins cleaning her teeth. She giggles when some paste sticks to her nose, a reminder that even serious dental innovation didn't escape playful human error. You can't help but smile, picturing generations of children doing this, unknowingly practicing dental hygiene centuries ahead of its time. A little further down the riverbank, you notice a cluster of small workshops where artisans crush mineral salts into fine powder. They add fragrant oils like frankincense and myrrh, creating a final product that is simultaneously medicinal, aromatic, and slightly magical. The mixture is stored in tiny jars for local families and traveling merchants alike. Some unusual recipes even called for crocodile dung as a binding agent, though you hesitate to touch any. It's gross, yes, but it reflects a curious Egyptian logic: if it works, even if it's disgusting. As you wander back toward the city, you glance at the moonlit Nile and think about the chain of discovery: river silt, herbs, natron, honey, and unconventional additives all coming together in paste form. This innovation wasn't a single eureka moment but a centuries-long experiment, a cumulative effort of observation, trial, and perhaps a little superstition. And tonight, standing here, you can almost hear the whispers of countless hands, mixing, grinding, testing, and perfecting the world's first toothpaste. The morning sun rises, spilling warm amber light over the city. You weave through narrow streets now busy with merchants setting up stalls, the aroma of fresh bread, roasted grains, and honey mixing with the dust of the day. Among the clamor, you notice a small group gathered around a man demonstrating his wares: jars of the newest toothpaste blend. The bottles are crude by modern standards, small clay vessels sealed with wax, but the contents glisten like golden paste, promising cleaner teeth and fresher breath. You approach, and he explains the formula: finely crushed natron, powdered myrrh, a hint of pepper, and honey as a binding agent. The mixture is surprisingly versatile, used not only to clean teeth but also to soothe minor gum irritation. A quirky tidbit: some wealthy clients preferred it mixed with fragrant oils like cassia or even saffron to leave their mouths smelling subtly of luxury. Historians still argue whether this was practical or more about social signaling, but the fact remains that oral care had become a commodity, a product with both health and status value. Children play nearby, twigs in hand, applying the paste under the careful watch of parents. You notice the small details: a careful rubbing motion, the upward flicks to reach molars, the slight grimace when the pepper hits the gums. The basic technique hasn't changed much over millennia, it's a tactile, rhythmic process. You chuckle at the mental image of a modern toothbrush commercial set in ancient Egypt. For a smile fit for the pharaoh, use natron and honey daily. Beyond the market, you glimpse a scribe documenting formulas in papyrus scrolls. These records are meticulous, detailing ingredient proportions, mixing methods, and even timing, morning or evening application. Some scrolls suggest certain pastes for children, others for the elderly. The level of care is impressive, and you marvel at how dentistry had grown from simple scrubbing sticks to detailed knowledge codified in writing. A local priest wanders through the market, carrying small jars to bless the products. He sprinkles a few drops of holy water, murmuring invocations. The spiritual dimension persists. Oral care is never purely physical. Some scholars still debate how effective these blessings were, but the psychological comfort cannot be denied. Even today, rituals around hygiene, mouthwashes, minty rinses, or even bedtime routines echo this ancient blend of practical and mystical care. You notice a quirky, somewhat unsavory practice. Some vendors mixed powdered crocodile or hippo dung into paste as a binding agent. To modern eyes, it's horrifying, but Egyptians believed it had protective qualities. You resist touching the sample but can't help mentally applauding the creativity, however misguided it seems. By midday, the streets hum with life. The paste has moved from sacred spaces into common households, becoming part of daily routine. Watching families dip twigs into jars of honey-laden powder, you sense a continuity. This is the heartbeat of Egyptian innovation. The fight against tooth decay isn't limited to the palace or temples, it's alive in everyday practice, passed down from generation to generation. You wander toward the workshops lining the outskirts of the city, where artisans grind ingredients with precision born of generations. The air smells faintly of herbs, natron, and faint smoke from nearby kilns. You pause to watch an elderly woman carefully pounding myrrh into a fine powder, her hands steady despite age. She hums a soft tune that carries through the room, blending with the rhythmic clack of stone on stone. This is where experimentation meets craftsmanship, and you can sense centuries of trial and error condensed into these small motions. A young apprentice approaches, carrying a tray of various pastes. Some are sweetened with honey, others mixed with fragrant oils. One jar contains the infamous mixture of crushed eggshells and natron, meant to strengthen teeth. Your nose wrinkles at the thought, but the apprentice swears it works. You watch as he dips a twig into one jar, demonstrating for a visitor how to rub the mixture gently along the gums. It's tactile, messy, and oddly satisfying, a hands-on lesson in hygiene that predates dental school by millennia. Historians still argue whether Egyptians fully understood the chemical properties of these ingredients, but you notice the logic. Abrasive powders clean, sweeteners encourage use, and aromatic herbs mask unpleasant flavors. It's a system built from observation, experimentation, and trial, not modern chemistry, yet effective enough to make a noticeable difference in oral health. Some fringe historians even suggest the combination of honey and certain spices could have slowed bacterial growth, hinting at proto-scientific insight. A quirky detail catches your eye. Some pastes include powdered oxen hooves or burnt animal bones. The idea seems bizarre now, but Egyptians believed these materials strengthened teeth, acting almost like primitive enamel reinforcement. You shiver slightly at the thought of brushing with bone powder, yet the confidence with which the artisans handle these ingredients is impressive. It's a testament to their pragmatic ingenuity. If it worked, it stayed in the formula. You meander further, noticing jars labeled for different social classes. The wealthier patrons receive pastes scented with exotic oils and spices. Commoners get more functional, straightforward mixtures. This subtle stratification mirrors much of Egyptian society. Status shows even in oral hygiene. But despite the differences in ingredients, the underlying principle is shared. Cleaning teeth isn't optional, it's vital. The day wanes, and the artisans begin packing jars for distribution. You watch them load small clay vessels onto donkeys, ready to travel to markets, temples, and homes. Each jar carries more than paste, it carries knowledge, practice, and a centuries-old belief in the importance of healthy teeth. You realize that every household, every family, is part of a living experiment, spreading wisdom, ingredients, and rituals that will echo long after the pyramids stand silent. Twilight drapes the city in soft violet hues, and the streets hum with a quieter rhythm. You wander past temples now illuminated by flickering torches, the smell of incense hanging thick in the air. Somewhere a water jar tips, spilling a gentle stream that trickles over stone, a sound that seems to echo through the alleys. In this calm, you reflect on how toothpaste in ancient Egypt isn't just an invention, it's a bridge between everyday life, science, and ritual. You pause at a small home where a family gathers around a low table. A mother dips a frayed twig into a small jar of honey-laced natron paste, demonstrating careful circular motions on her child's teeth. The child giggles, smearing a little on her nose. You chuckle with them, realizing that oral care has become a communal, almost playful activity. Quirky detail. Some households even experimented with spices like pepper or clove to strengthen the bite, a practice that sounds more like culinary mischief than hygiene, yet somehow persisted for generations. Nearby, a scribe records the day's observations in a papyrus notebook. He documents which mixtures were most effective, which twigs worked best for different ages, and the reactions of children and elders alike. Scholars today still argue whether these notes were primarily practical guides or if they served as proto-magical prescriptions. But watching him write, you see a meticulousness that mirrors modern clinical studies, centuries before microscopes and dental journals existed. As you continue, you notice that toothpaste is becoming integrated into wider cultural rituals. Priests bless the jars, women mix herbal infusions, and children learn the motions early, combining health with education and spirituality. Historians debate how much of this is symbolic versus practical, but the blending of purpose is undeniable. You step into a courtyard where a small demonstration is underway. Elders teach the children, reciting rhymes that make the motions easier to remember. Oral hygiene becomes both a lesson and a social performance, tying the individual to the community. In one corner, a merchant demonstrates the newest paste with an extravagant flourish, a blend of natron, mint, myrrh, and honey, presented in a polished clay jar. The scent is earthy yet sweet, familiar yet exotic. People sniff, smile, and nod approvingly. Some try a small smear, tasting the gritty, aromatic mixture. Fringe scholars suggest this sensory appeal might have been deliberately designed to encourage regular use, a kind of ancient marketing insight. You grin at the idea ancient toothpaste influencers, centuries ahead of Instagram. The streets darken further, and lanterns cast long shadows across walls etched with hieroglyphs. You notice the continuity of tradition, mixtures handed down, tweaks made through observation, and rituals that reinforce habit. From palace kitchens to humble homes, Egyptians have crafted not only a functional product but a culture of care, subtly weaving science, spirituality, and social cohesion into the very act of cleaning teeth. Standing there, you can almost hear the collective effort echoing through time, hands mixing, twigs scraping, knowledge passing from generation to generation, leaving behind a legacy that reaches you even now. Night deepens, and the city breathes in soft, steady rhythm. You wander the quiet streets, the air cooler now, scented faintly with herbs, baking grains, and the lingering warmth of the sun-soaked stone. In this serene moment, you reflect on the journey of the humble toothpaste, from a riverbank mixture of natron and sand to the sweet, fragrant pastes passed from hand to hand across generations. It is more than a cleaning tool, it is a testament to human curiosity, resourcefulness, and the relentless desire to improve daily life. You pause at a small courtyard where a mother whispers instructions to her child, guiding tiny fingers as they trace circular motions on a stick coated with paste. The child giggles, rubbing a little across her cheek before correcting herself. The ritual is both practical and nurturing, binding generations together. Fringe historians suggest these early lessons shaped not only dental hygiene but broader habits of discipline, patience, and observation. You smile, imagining the countless children learning the same motions under moonlit courtyards across centuries. Nearby, an elderly artisan carefully seals the last jars of paste for the day. The mixture gleams golden in the torchlight, a combination of crushed minerals, honey, aromatic herbs, and, occasionally, more unusual ingredients like burnt eggshells. You think back to the strange additions, the crocodile dung, the ox hooves, and marvel at the Egyptians' bold experimentation. Historians still argue whether they understood the chemistry or relied purely on trial and error, yet their results speak for themselves: teeth cleaner, breath fresher, and a knowledge system passed down that would eventually inform future civilizations. You wander toward the temple steps, noticing a scribe finishing a detailed papyrus scroll of toothpaste recipes. Some formulas include practical notes, others suggest magical blessings for health and protection. It's a reminder that, in ancient Egypt, science, medicine, and ritual often coexisted seamlessly. You can almost hear the echoes of debate among scholars: which pastes were truly effective, which were symbolic, and how much ritual shaped belief in their potency. Every jar, every twig, every child's giggle adds a piece to this evolving puzzle of innovation. As you stroll under the starlit sky, the rhythm of the city slows, and you feel the weight of history in your chest. The toothpaste story, seemingly small, is a lens into a larger culture of ingenuity and care, blending observation, experimentation, and daily life into something profoundly human. The legacy persists in every brush, every paste, and every mindful gesture toward oral health even now, millennia later. You pause, breathe in the cool night air, and realize that while civilizations rise and fall, the simple act of caring for one's teeth has endured, connecting you to hands and hearts long gone but not forgotten. Night fully embraces the city, and the last flickers of torchlight fade. You settle onto a stone bench, the sounds of distant water and soft winds lulling your mind. You feel a calm certainty. The Egyptians' toothpaste was not just a paste, not just a tool, but a bridge through time, a gentle whisper from the past reminding you that innovation often begins in curiosity, patience, and a little messiness. Now, allow your thoughts to drift like the Nile under moonlight. Let the scents of herbs and honey fade into memory, and the echoes of tiny twigs tracing circles on teeth settle into a comforting rhythm. You are connected to those long-ago hands, those careful mixtures, those small victories over grime and decay. Sleep gently, carrying forward the ingenuity and care of a civilization that lived, experimented, and smiled, literally. The night stretches on, soft and endless, and you feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort. The streets of ancient Egypt are quiet now, the laughter of children and the clatter of markets replaced by gentle whispers of wind over stone and water. You can imagine the subtle aroma of herbs lingering in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of honey, wrapping around you like a gentle blanket. Every movement, every sound, every shimmer of moonlight seems slowed, deliberate, as though time itself has softened its edges for your ease. Think of the hands that mixed natron and fragrant oils, that ground herbs with care, that guided tiny fingers on twigs smeared with paste. These were people who lived fully in their moments, attentive to small details that mattered, finding joy even in mundane tasks. The city exhales around you, a living testament to human curiosity, care, and the quiet persistence of innovation. You feel part of that long, unbroken chain, connected across centuries through something as simple, and as essential, as caring for one's teeth. Let your body mirror this slow, gentle rhythm. Inhale, exhale, the way the Nile would have breathed under moonlight. Your mind can drift with the scents, the sounds, and the tiny victories of generations past, allowing sleep to wash over you in the softest tide. The past and present intertwine, and with each heartbeat, you carry a small piece of that wisdom forward. Rest now. Let the world of ancient Egypt, its pastes and twigs, its rituals and laughter, fade into the background of your dreams. Trust that this moment of calm, curiosity, and quiet wonder will linger with you, softening the edges of the night, until the morning gently nudges you awake.